ladies and gentlemen. Today you're going to meet some of Broward's most prominent pioneers who've come together to welcome you to their county. Though no longer with us, you'll hear their special welcome messages. Each has a unique perspective to share, and collectively they may help you better understand why our community is what it is today. So without further ado, let me welcome to the screen Mr. Henry Morrison Flagler. Mr. Flagler?
Why, thank you, and hello, everyone. I bet not many of you arrived in South Florida by train on your first trip here. What with those airplanes buzzing around us like gnats and ribbons of highway spiraling through our area? In fact, none of you would be here at all without the railroad that my company extended into Broward in 1896. You see, it was the first practical way that settlers and tourists could come here. Before the train, only travel by boat and stagecoach was possible. And as you can imagine, neither was easy. My wife Mary and I first visited Florida in 1878. We truly loved its warmth and natural beauty. Having made a few dollars in the oil business with my partner, John D. Rockefeller, I had the wherewithal to invest in Florida's future. I built the Florida East Coast Railway to St. Augustine, then to Titusville, to West Palm Beach, to Miami, and finally to Key West. We carried settlers and supplies south and crops north. Oh, we carried a few tourists, many of whom stayed in hotels we had built along the way. Of course, some tourists were traveling to Florida even before the railroad was finished. Let me introduce you to one of those visitors, who was also captivated by Broward's natural beauty. Please say hello to Hugh Taylor Birch.
Well, thanks, Mr. Flagler. Folks, if you want to know what this area looked like when I first arrived in 1894, just take a walk through what they now call Birch State Park on Fort Lauderdale Beach, just north of the area where I lived for nearly 50 years. Back then, the only people in these parts, along with the Seminole Indians who had camps throughout the area, were a few scattered farmers and people living at the House of Refuge on the beach and the Strahan Trading Post in the area you know as downtown, where the ferry could travel the shortest distance across the New River. In the early years, the only route to the beach was by boat, as the first Las Olas Bridge wasn't constructed until 1917. Sunrise Boulevard wasn't cut through my property until 1938, with A1A built along the shore a few years later. By then, the developers had carved up much of the beach, but they never got their hands on most of my property. Now here's a fella who can tell you a thing or two about the development of South Broward. You could call Joseph Young Mr. Hollywood.
Thank you, Mr. Birch. Hey, anybody here looking to buy a house in Hollywood by the Sea? Be sure to visit the lake section. That's where we dredged 2 yacht basins and used the fill to shore up the mangroves so we could build homes in the early 20s. In 1924, I moved into my own house on Hollywood Boulevard, a beautiful, wide, palm-lined highway that spanned the distance from the Hollywood Beach Hotel, now called Ocean Walk, to downtown Hollywood by the Sea, around what became known as Young Circle, named after me, and we were off to a fine start in Hollywood by the Sea until that blasted hurricane in 1926 caused the collapse of the 20s land boom. Things were so bad that the stock market crash in 1929 was almost anticlimactic. You know, when I look back on those times, what I'm most proud of is the cut we dredged from the ocean through the coastline to create Port Everglades out of what used to be called Lake Mabel. Now, that was back in 1928, and that helped create some jobs and build our economy back from the Great Depression. While we were developing Hollywood by the Sea, much of the same was going on in South Fort Lauderdale at the hands of Frank Croissant and other developers. Hello, Frank.
Hello, Joe. Ladies and gentlemen, you should know that land development has had an important role in the history of our area since just after the turn of the century. It was back in 1924 when I bought 1,270 acres bounded by Federal Highway on the east and Southwest 9th Avenue on the west, with a team of 96 salesmen, a fleet of 11 buses to bring prospects up from Miami, a 1925 advertising budget of $215,000, and beachfront beauty contest to attract news coverage up north. We set out to make Fort Lauderdale the fastest growing city in Florida. That 26 hurricane blew our dreams away, but not before Croissant Park and Fort Lauderdale made it onto the map. Of course, none of us would have been selling land without earlier help from Florida's popular governor, Napoleon Bonaparte Broward.
Why, shucks, Frank. You're awful good to give me so much credit. And I can't thank you folks enough for adopting the Broward name when you carved a new county out of the northern part of Dade and the southern part of Palm Beach County. I was sheriff of Duval, the county that included Jacksonville, when I decided to run for the Florida legislature, and then for governor. I was elected in 1904 on a platform of railroad regulation, party primaries, and Everglades drainage. You know, those railroaders fought me on regulation, and they also fought me on drainage. They didn't want more land sales in South Florida to compete with the land they were trying to sell. Despite their opposition, and with support from the legislature, we started dredging the New River Canal in 1906, near the site of Sailboat Bend, about where today's Performing Arts Center sits at Southwest 7th Avenue in the New River. Dredging the canals helped drain lands all around, leading to the area's first land boom in 1910. I had a vision back then to drain the whole Everglades for agriculture. But our dredging projects were funded by the sale of land and stock, and hard times slowed both before we could accomplish very much. I'll bet those Seminole Indians were sure glad we stopped when we did. Why, here's Annie Jumper Tommy. I'll bet she'll have a thing or two to say.
It was a terrible thing to watch the life of so many Indians destroyed by all of the development of South Florida, including drainage of the Everglades, the land booms, and the increasing number of white settlers in the area. In the mid-1800s, during the Seminole Wars, all Indian families lived throughout South Florida and were expert fishermen and farmers, like my father, Johnny Jumper, who farmed the land north of the river at the Tarpon Bend. There was little contact with the white man until he found his way into Florida, changing our life forever. Over the years, a new Indian lifestyle developed so that trading with the white man became practical, and many of our children attend public school, including my son, Tony Tommy. When the federal government established the Seminole Indian Reservation in 1924 on the land west of Daniel of what is now known as Highway 441, we moved there. Others prefer to live a more traditional lifestyle deep in the Everglades. Of course, not all new settlers cause problems. Take that R.V. Kamali Stranahan, who taught Indian children at school and who helped her husband Frank run the trading post at the site of the current Stranahan House on the New River. Thank you for all of your good deeds, Mrs. Stranahan.
Why, you're welcome, Annie. Frank Stranahan and I were married in 1900, a year after I came to Fort Lauderdale as the first school teacher of the pioneer community. Hard to believe that was 100 years ago. We moved from northern Florida to a Lemon City community north of Miami, and then up here to the pioneer settlement not far from the beachfront side of old Fort Lauderdale. I found the Seminoles to be so fascinating when they came by canoe and by foot to our little trading post on the New River, later the site of my longtime home and what is now the Stranahan House Museum. That was where Frank operated the ferry for people, horses, and coaches to cross the New River on their travels between Miami and West Palm Beach. But it was the Seminoles that were most interesting to me. With their unusual customs and clothing, I made up my mind early on to teach their children, and I held regular classes for dozens of Seminoles, in addition to the 1 year I spent in the schoolroom teaching children of the local settlers. I became a member of the Friends of the Seminoles organization. We lobbied for Indian causes at the state and federal levels. But there were other important causes back then, like women's suffrage, wildlife conservation, housing and health care for the poor, and temperance. Not officially chartered by the state of Florida until 1911, Fort Lauderdale was in its infancy after the turn of the century. We had many important community needs, but education was our most important of all. I certainly wasn't alone in focusing on the need for education. Another pioneer and local educator, Blanche Ely, made a profound impact on our young people, particularly members of our colored community. Hello to you, Mrs. Ely.
And hello to you, Mrs. Stranahan. It was not only settlers and Indians who made up the local population after the turn of the century, but an increasing number of black people, referred to as colored people, who sought better future for their families. That's why I dedicated my life to education. Like Mrs. Stranahan, I grew up in North Florida. I attended Florida A&M University and Columbia University, where I received a bachelor's and a master's degree. I was assigned to teach in a 2-room schoolhouse in Hammondsville Road. I was appointed principal of the Pompano Colored School. I secured the first supported lunch programs in Broward County. I helped to sponsor a housing project for low-income families. I also supported the Migrant Housing Project, which was built for migrant workers of all races and cultures. I provided a project school, which is now Markham Elementary, especially intended for migrant workers' children. In 1953, a high school was built in the northwest area of Pompano. My students and colleagues petitioned the school board to name the school for me. I recruited teachers from other states to bring in innovative, creative ideas. My teachers were the best. Today, my students are serving with honor and integrity in all walks of life. Desegregation caused the closure of the school in 1970, but it was ordered reopened as a high school for young people of all races by the United States Supreme Court because of a lawsuit filed by the Parent Teachers Association of Blanche Ely High School. The school was reopened in 1975 as Ely High School. Times certainly have changed. Our community is a true reflection of America, a place where people of all colors, creeds, and nationalities work together to make a better life for everyone. It is a big city now with big city problems, but it's got a great heart and soul. Thanks to all of these fine people that you have heard from today. I hope you will get to know more about us and so many other hard-working, determined community pioneers, and maybe someday not too far away, someone will ask you to be part of a presentation like this. My best wishes to all of you, and thanks for everything you will do to make this community a better place. Goodbye now.
Well, there they are, just a few of the pioneers who helped create Fort Lauderdale and Broward County. From the way we were to the way we are. Now, it's up to you how we will be.